Hello and welcome to Programming for Engineers. I'm Dr. Ron England, and today we're going to go over the concept of functions and scope. This is going to be one of the shorter lectures that I produce, but also one of the most important lectures that you need to understand. First thing is the concept of defining a function in code. So let's look at this function right here. In the case of this is in Python, and we can also define functions in any language, but in Python the def keyword allows us to define a function. So first I use the def keyword to define that I'm going to actually write a function. Then I'm going to give the name of the function. In this case, the name is going to be add to variable. And then I give it a list of parameters. So it's going to be the variables that are being used within the function to do what you want the function to do. So in this case, I pass it a variable x. So the function itself is going to do two things here, actually three things. It's going to increment the x by 1 by saying x equals x plus 1. It's going to print the local value, that value of x, and then it's going to return the x that it had. So if I take this, I highlight it, and I hit Control Enter, all that's going to do is put that function into memory. Notice there's no output. Okay, all I've done is define the function and put the function into the Python in the memory. So that now what I can do is I can call it. So let's do that call. Let's create a variable d and set it equal to 1. And then let's create a second variable e and set it equal to the results of the function while passing over d. Now, in the case of the function that I've defined, it's going to pass by value. So in other words, the value of d is going to be passed to the function. Well, the value of d is 1. And then it's going to perform whatever the function is supposed to do, which is in the case increment by 1, print it, and return the incremented value, and that being assigned to e, and then I can print those out. So let's look and see what happens if I do that. So we're going to go ahead and highlight this and hit Control Enter, and now I've called the function, and what we can see here is that it printed out the local x and the value, which in this case we passed it a 1, so the local x is 2. And it passed back the value of d and e. The d I passed in was 1. The value passed back, which I assigned to e, is 2. And those two printed out as I expected it. Now, let's get now a little bit into the concept of scope. What if I define the value of x outside the function? What will happen? Well, here's where we get into the concept of scope. In the case of defining this function with the x is said to have local scope or function scope. It's only visible inside the function. So if I go out here and I define an x, that is not the same x as the one that's inside of the function. It is an x that has global scope. So let's take this x equals 1, go ahead and assign the value 1 to the variable x, assign the variable that is the return value of the function, add the variable with the x passed over to y, and see what happens. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and Control Enter that. And if we look over here, you'll see that the local x is 2, which we would expect because we passed over a 1. But notice the value of x outside the function call, after we're done with the function, is back to 1. And then y is 2, which is the incremented value of that. That's because we passed the value of x over to the function. Even though x was a global variable, the x that is actually inside of the function has local scope, where the x that is outside has global scope. But this globally scoped x is not the same as this locally scoped x. It doesn't mean that I can't use the globally scoped x inside the function, but to do that, I would have to say to use that specific instance of x that's the global one. And here's a hint. Don't do that. That is bad. That is not something that you want to be doing in programming. Keep your variables that are locally scoped. When you've got, try to minimize the number of, keep your locally scoped variables locally scoped, and try to minimize the number of variables that you have that have global scope. Okay, in programming, that's always a good idea. But understand that this x here, it's outside of the function, and this x here, it's inside the function, are actually two different variables based on the scoping rules. Now, there's a lot more that you can learn about scoping rules, but these basic things that I just showed you are the ones that are really important to know. That concept of global, local scope, and how a function works. Thank you, and good programming.